Good afternoon, Joanne. Thanks so much for taking some time out and getting involved with our spotlight interview this week. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and just let everybody know a bit about your organisation and what it is you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. So my name's Joanne Barnes and I'm CEO of Nexus NI. So Nexus is a charitable organisation in Northern Ireland. It's Northern Ireland's leading sexual trauma charity and has been in existence for just over 35 years. So our key role is to provide supports and services to people who are affected by sexual trauma and more recently domestic abuse.
Okay, so how long have you been with the organisation, Joanne?
So I'm fairly new to the organisation. I only took up post in January of this year, so 10 months, 11 months now. So yeah, fairly new.
And I know from talking to other charities and not-for-profit that there's a big shift for organisations like yours to become a little bit more commercial and stand on your own 2 feet outside of grants and donations, etc. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah. So we do get a large bulk of our funding through statutory funding and grant-making trusts. But yes, we are striving more so to, I suppose, build our unrestricted income through income generation. So we would offer training and psychoeducation to corporates and community organisations to really build their knowledge and awareness around sexual trauma and domestic abuse.
Okay, and tell me a bit more about that. What sort of relevance to an employer is there? Is this something that they have to be aware of, or is this a good fit for better cultures, or how does it fit into big business today?
I suppose it's really around your people, place, and planet, isn't it? So it's that sort of old term of CSR. So what an employer is doing more broadly for the health and well-being of its workforce. Yeah. So unfortunately, domestic abuse incidents happen every minute in Northern Ireland. We're the second highest incident rate of domestic abuse in the whole of Europe. So that and then sexual abuse happens day in and day out, and there's a lot of people living with a legacy of childhood sexual abuse. So employers might not be aware of how that trauma will then present and affect an individual into adulthood, especially if the individual hasn't sought support at the time, which is often the case because they just want to forget about the issue. They want to try and, move on with their life, or they haven't told anyone. So yeah, that can present in different ways within a workforce. So it's really helpful for employers to know, how domestic abuse and sexual abuse might present, how it might affect someone, the challenges that they may face in the workplace as a result of that. It may lead to poor performance, etc. And people, may be managed through discipline or performance management when actually they just need a bit of help and support. So for us, it's really key to, I suppose, educate employers as to how to recognise those signs and to have sensitive conversations and then signpost people appropriately.
Yeah, and you say about educating there as well. Is there a factor of that where what you described there is obviously probably the most serious end of the scale? Is it around educating on some stuff that people maybe wouldn't associate with sexual abuse?
Absolutely, like control and coercion. So that's just recently been recognised in law and in statute. So that is a criminal offence now. So, people might think, the good old sayings of, oh, they only behave that way because they love me, or, they take control of the money because they're better with it, etc. But actually, they can all be key signs of control and coercion within a relationship. So again, educating people on that, but doing so with the fact that we then have the support built in. So if we're doing that training and then someone makes a disclosure, we can ensure that they're signposted to services and get access to support pretty promptly. The other element is sexual harassment in the workplace. That hasn't gone away. And yeah, employers obviously have a legal duty to protect their workforce. So the likes of ourselves going in as a specialist organisation to deliver that training, helps employers educate employees on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, what aligns with their company policy, even around client relationships and what that might look like.
And I suppose, just even from a commercial side of things, it's far better to stop anything happening and have to deal with it afterwards, as disruption.
Yeah, to deal with it, either the trauma that the individual's experienced or the conflict that's built up maybe within the professional boundaries of the relationship as a result. And sometimes it's often misconstrued. People don't realise that they're that they're I suppose, invading somebody's physical space and making them feel uncomfortable. So it's just raising awareness. And B, if an employer doesn't train people appropriately, they could be deemed liable for not managing the situation effectively in the first place and not setting out standards for employees to adhere to.
So that's really interesting. I can't believe the stat you gave earlier with it's like an incident every minute. It's just so prevalent and happening so often. So tell me a little bit more then about what it's like to be at the head of this organization, to try and move more commercially. What sort of challenges did you face with COVID then, for example?
Well, I suppose we had a very flat service delivery model pre-COVID, and the organisation really provides services in person in front of you. So people come in, attended counselling in person. We went out and delivered training in businesses and organisations and community groups in schools. Obviously, COVID put pay to that, but we still needed to deliver our services. And in fact, even more so, we also run the domestic and sexual abuse helpline for Northern Ireland. That was required even more because people were confined in their own quarters, and actually they relied more on instant messaging for support at that time because it wasn't safe for them to actually have a physical telephone call, an audio call. Because they were living with their perpetrators. So yeah, we had to adapt. We had to change our systems so that they were IMS suitable. We had to go into a hybrid Teams model, video conferencing calls for counselling sessions. So yeah, there was a bit of a quick shift. And actually, I suppose the pandemic really engendered that because we had some resistance within old school sort of ideas with staff around, for a therapeutic relationship, you need to be in the room, you need to be connected. Even then with our trainers, to manage a group, you need to be out, you need to be present, you need to be with them. So that sort of shifted that mindset quite quickly because we needed to survive. And actually, we've learned from COVID then that we can still deliver services really effectively, virtually, by telephone, etc. So yeah, it was a shift and has brought positive to us. This really now gives our clients choice. Where do you want your counselling to happen? Do you want it to happen in person? Do you want it to happen remotely? Do you want to have it happen by telephone? And again, the companies that we provide training for, if their staff are regionally based and they want to bring them all together rather than everybody travelling to a central location, we can do the training online. So it really has helped us, I suppose, diversify our format of delivery.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about you as a business leader then? What's been the biggest challenge you've had to overcome since you took up the role?
Yeah, so I arrived at Nexus and it was in a bit of a state of flux at that time. They'd had to introduce an interim CEO from the previous CEO exiting. So yeah, they had gone through a bit of upheaval and a bit of churn of CEOs for the last number of years, which unsettles staff without a doubt, and probably leads them to feeling uncertain and potentially undervalued because the organisation is, I suppose, trying to just survive rather than thrive.
Yeah.
So yeah, whilst as an organisation, we were still delivering services to an exceptional standards internally, culture had definitely taken a hit, and people's morale had definitely taken a hit. COVID, big struggle for individuals. So yes, on coming into the organisation, it was really imperative to me that we sort of did a lock and stock review. So we did undertake an organisational review just to listen to staff, listen to our stakeholders, get feedback from our clients, from our funders, really to see what we were doing well and what we weren't doing so well. And then from that, we agreed a 3-stage action plan, which looks across the board at our culture, our structure, our policies, our processes, and our systems. So staff really feeling heard in that space. I don't think they'd felt heard in quite a while. So having that proactive engagement with them, and then the feedback and the follow-up from that, we listened, we heard, you said this, we've listened and we're responding by doing, X. So yeah, that has been really useful. Because when I did arrive, I was hearing a lot about the legacy of the past. And as a leader, that can be difficult because you can't resolve the past. You can only commit to build a different future. and to bring people along with you in that journey. You do, yes, have to hear them, but that hearing of past issues has to be time limited, because otherwise it prevents progress and it prevents evolvement. And we all know if we don't evolve as a company, as a business, you're actually going backwards because your competitors are moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a pretty comprehensive action plan you had to put into place there. And, the key to it obviously is taking on information from the stakeholders, but then that has to have a time limit on it, of course, to move forward. So I'm interested in, what about you yourself? What have you learned about yourself?
Well, I suppose I always knew I was solution focused. I'm probably, it's reinforced the fact that I find it difficult to come out of the work, if you like, operationally. So, ideally as a leader, I should be purely strategic, and, I should be out there around networking and partnerships and all the rest of that. But I find that hard to do unless you really know the business. And I also think it's easier for people to play smoke and mirrors with you if you don't know the business. And for leaders to, I suppose, be misled potentially in the problems that are the challenges that are going on within the organization. So I had committed to come in and do 3 months of just listening. Unfortunately, due to how the organization was, that wasn't possible. But in, I suppose, getting involved and being very operational initially, it did give me a good insight into the real challenges, but also the real possibilities and the real potential. Despite me wanting to take a new tact as a CEO, that didn't really happen. I'm pleased to say now, through our 3-stage investment plan, I am being able to step back a bit more. We're getting new staff in, with a new structure in place. We're heavily recruiting at present, which we all know is a challenge. And getting the right people, and people wanting to move in what is quite a challenging economic climate. It's definitely an employee market out there at the moment. So getting all of that in place is enabling me to start to take those steps back and do more with what I would be, to me, the face of the organization, ensuring that it's, yes, absolutely fit for purpose, and that it's being run to a really, really high standard. But doing more of the promotion, the getting the name known, the brand known.
Fantastic. And it sounds like you've achieved an incredible amount in a fairly short space of time, and it's great to hear it's all going in the right direction. What would you say, even in maybe in the next 12 months, obviously there are difficult economic times ahead. What would you say that the biggest challenge is going to be for you moving forward?
Yeah, I think that probably the economic climate is definitely going to play a part. At the moment, many of our statutory contracts are fixed contracts in terms of the income that they yield. So there will be challenging conversations that will need to be had with funders around what they're getting for their money, because their money's not going to stretch as far as it had done in the past. And that can be challenging with statutory funders in particular. And the lack of a sitting assembly at the moment is our other big challenge in that space, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to change in terms of legalities, policies, and even getting a budget set for the island would be helpful. So there's going to have to be challenging conversations, but we have to be realistic with our funders, and it's not around trying to gain money for profit's sake. It's around us being able to truly deliver to the standards that we want to deliver to. But to do that, I also need to be seen to be flexible as a leader. And I do feel the organization, in terms of the types of therapeutic interventions that it's offered in the past, has been quite flat. And it's sort of been a one size fits all. So I'm really keen to introduce a different model of service delivery, still trauma informed, but really around a match step care model, which anyone working in the healthcare industry will have heard of. But that really means that individuals come in, they're triaged, like you would get when you go to A&E. You see how your problem is impacting on you individually. And then we assess as to the most appropriate form of therapeutic intervention that's going to meet your needs. And that will be scaled depending on the impact that the issue's having on your life. So at the moment, we're a flat 18 sessions of counselling, that's 6 months of somebody's life, where actually sometimes our clients aren't really in a place to take that on. They might be have challenges going on elsewhere in their lives, and they just need some self-help resources, some supports that can maybe contain them in the moment until they're able to, I suppose, undertake that therapeutic work. So we need to be more agile. We need to think more flexibly around how we deliver stuff, but still do so safely, clinically safely, for the people that we're working for.
Yeah, that's it sounds very logical. It makes a lot of sense, and I think I see how it will really have a big impact. And then what's the future look like? So you're being able to get out of boxes, as we would say, and you're employing staff, and then you're going to be able to drive the organization forward. So what's the bright side of all this? What's the future look like in the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, for me, I suppose it is growth within Nexus. So, we are evolving with a new strategy that's just being developed at the minute. So that'll take us through the next 3 years from 23 to 26. That strategy is going to see us, I suppose, moving into new areas of work, aligned areas of work, but certainly new areas. As I noted, we do host the domestic and sexual abuse helpline for Northern Ireland. We've just successfully been awarded a domestic abuse contract for male survivors of domestic violence. So that's us moving more into a therapeutic world with domestic abuse. And I would see that area of work going to grow and continue to grow. The elephant also always in the room is to really break the cycle and break the silence on sexual trauma. Someone somewhere needs to work with perpetrators. That needs to change. Whether that's Nexus, I don't know, because we have such a strong relationship built up with victims, but victims themselves recognize that until you actually get to the root of the problem, the people who are committing the offences, how do we ever really truly make change happen, and really change those behaviours and decrease the incidence of domestic and sexual abuse?
I think you put it brilliantly, even before we started the interview, where you're actually trying to do yourself out of a job that you don't need.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my ideal is, in 20 years from now, Nexus, certainly to the size and scale it is at the minute, shouldn't be needed, because we should have a society much more aware of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable behaviours in terms of relationships. We should have young people who have grown and evolved to know what a safe and healthy relationship looks like, so that they do not, I suppose, perpetrate abusive patterns of behaviour whenever they are in relationships. They know the red flags, they know when to get out. That is our ideal through our sort of psychoeducation and our training projects, that young people sort of take a stand to, I suppose, not tolerate and have that zero tolerance approach of abusive relationships.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, just to finish up then, one of my favourite questions to ask, do you have any favourite quotes or sayings you picked up along the way that are serving you well?
Yeah, I suppose to me, coming from that sort of psychological sort of background and the mindfulness sort of background, the big one for me is the only journey is the one within. So, we talk about the bigger journey and, where we're getting to, but if you're not taking that journey within yourself, it can be very challenging to do that beyond the parameters of yourself. And the only thing that we actually really have control of is ourselves. I know we try to do all of these things to control elements of our life, but actually the contentment and the control you have is within.
That makes sense, and massive pressure off when you concede to that, I'm sure, as well. Look, Joanne, thanks so much for taking the time out. I really enjoyed finding out a bit more about what you guys are up to and how it's going. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. It was a privilege.